He had everything that money could buy. Expensive cars lined his garage, his mansion stood tall like a palace, and people bowed their heads whenever he walked into a room. To the outside world he was the picture of success, the kind of man others envied. But inside there was something missing, something money could not fix. For years, a memory lived in his heart, and no matter how rich he became, that memory refused to fade. It was the memory of a woman. Not a celebrity, not a business partner, not anyone from the world of the rich. She was an ordinary woman whose face he could never forget. Long ago, before his billions, before the fame, he had been at his lowest point. He was struggling, tired, and lost. People had turned their backs on him because he had nothing to offer. Yet in that dark moment she had helped him. She had spoken to him with kindness, given him something small yet powerful, hope. She had looked at him not as a failure, not as a beggar, but as a human being. He never even asked her name. At the time he thought he would never see her again. But as the years went by and his fortune grew, her face remained clear in his mind. Sometimes, late at night, when the parties ended and the laughter of fake friends faded, he would sit alone and think of her. It wasn't love or romance, it was gratitude, deep and powerful. She had given him dignity when he had none. And he needed to thank her. The more he thought about her, the stronger the obsession grew. He told himself he owed her everything. Maybe if not for her kindness he would have given up back then. Maybe he would never have fought so hard to rise again. He wanted to find her, to repay her, to show her how her small act of humanity had changed his life. So the search began. He hired investigators, some of the best in the country. He described her face in detail, every line, every feature he could remember. He offered huge sums of money to anyone who could bring him answers. His assistants scanned through old records, photos, and public archives. He even announced in the media that he was looking for a woman who had once helped him, promising rewards to anyone who came forward with information. But the more he searched, the further away she seemed to be. Investigators brought him files of women who looked like her, but none of them were the right one. He traveled across states, chasing leads that ended in disappointment. Still he refused to give up. His obsession grew like a fire, burning brighter every day. People around him began to wonder. Why was a billionaire spending so much money, almost $35 million, just to find one ordinary woman? Some whispered that it was a love story. Others thought she must have been part of his past life, maybe a long-lost family member. Gossip spread in the business world, but he never explained. He kept the truth to himself. This was personal. Every morning when he woke up in his grand bedroom, he felt the same ache inside. He had everything, yet nothing. Until he found her, his success felt incomplete. He wanted to stand before her, not as the poor man she once helped, but as someone who had risen high. He wanted her to see that her small kindness had not been wasted. And so, his obsession consumed him. He stopped attending social events, leaving people to wonder why he had disappeared. He cut back on business meetings, focusing instead on the search. His assistants watched him grow restless, snapping at them when leads failed. His closest friends tried to tell him to move on, but he wouldn't listen. He was certain, if he could just find her, his heart would finally be at peace. What he didn't know was that the woman he had been searching for so desperately was much closer than he ever imagined. He passed by her almost every day, never once realizing who she truly was. She remained quiet, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the day the truth would reveal itself. But for now, the billionaire's obsession drove him forward, blind to the irony of his quest. He had spent millions chasing a shadow, never once considering that sometimes, what we seek is right before our eyes. The billionaire's search began quietly at first, almost like a secret project he did not want the world to know about. He called his private investigators into his study, a room filled with shelves of leather-bound books, maps and photos from his travels. He sat behind his polished oak desk, staring at them with a seriousness that made even hardened detectives nervous. "There is someone I must find," he said simply, sliding forward an old sketch. It wasn't a professional drawing, just something he had asked an artist to make years ago from memory. The face was rough, imperfect, but it captured her eyes, the same kind eyes that had stayed with him for so long. The investigators studied the sketch, puzzled. "Who is she? Family? Old friend?" one asked. The billionaire shook his head. "No. She is a woman who once helped me when no one else would. I don't know her name. I don't know where she lives. But I need to find her. Spare no expense." With that, the search began. Detectives combed through old city records, hospital logs, and community shelters, looking for any woman who might match the description. The billionaire poured money into the effort, millions at first, then tens of millions as the search dragged on. Newspaper ads were placed, social media campaigns launched. He even appeared in interviews saying only, "I am looking for someone who changed my life." His words stirred public curiosity, but no clear answers came. Rumors started spreading. People speculated endlessly. Some said the woman must have been an old lover. Others thought she was a long-lost relative. A few even believed it was all a publicity stunt, another eccentric move from a man with too much money. But the billionaire knew the truth, and it gave him no peace. Weeks turned into months and the trail grew colder. Investigators brought him photos of women who bore some resemblance to the sketch, but each time his heart sank. "Not her," he would mutter, shaking his head. Disappointment became a familiar companion. One night, after another failed lead, he sat alone in his mansion. The city lights glowed outside his window, but he saw none of it. His glass of wine sat untouched, his meal barely eaten. All he could think about was her voice, her kindness, the way she had treated him like a human being when he had nothing. He closed his eyes and remembered the moment clearly. The cold night. The hunger in his stomach. The hopelessness in his heart. And then, her. The way she spoke to him without judgment. The way she gave him food, a blanket, and a smile that told him he was not invisible. That one moment had stayed with him for decades, and now he could not rest until he repaid her. The search intensified. He sent his team overseas, chasing rumors that she might have moved. He funded community projects just to gather information from people who might have known her. Every time someone said, "I think I know who she is," his heart leapt, only to crash again when it wasn't her. Meanwhile, in his own home, the woman he searched for walked the halls every day. She cleaned the silverware, dusted the grand staircase, and polished the marble floors. She wore her maid's uniform, kept her head down, and went unnoticed. The billionaire had passed her hundreds of times, never once recognizing her. She had seen him age, seen his moods, seen his power grow, but she had never revealed who she was. To her it wasn't important. She had given kindness without expecting anything in return. And yet, fate had a strange sense of irony. While he spent $35 million scouring the world for her, the one place he had never looked was right in front of him, his own home. The search was tearing him apart. He was restless, frustrated, but still determined. "I will find her," he promised himself one evening as he stared at the fading sketch. "No matter how long it takes, no matter how much it costs, I will find her." He didn't realize then that the answer was waiting in the simplest, most unexpected place of all. The search dragged on, and the billionaire's life turned into a trail of endless leads, each one ending in bitter disappointment. His mansion became less of a home and more of a command center. Maps were pinned to walls, stacks of reports cluttered his desk, and investigators came and went at all hours. Every phone call made his heart beat faster, only for hope to collapse minutes later when yet another lead turned out to be false. The wrong trails piled up like ghosts haunting him. One investigator brought him news of a woman in a small rural town who matched the sketch. The billionaire flew there in his private jet, his chest tight with anticipation. He stepped out of his limousine onto a dusty road, feeling for the first time that maybe, just maybe, the journey was over. But when the woman opened her door, his heart dropped. The eyes were wrong. The smile was wrong. She was kind, yes, but not her. He thanked the woman politely, left a donation to her struggling family, and returned home hollow, as though a piece of him had been ripped out. Another lead took him across the ocean, to a coastal city where a witness swore they had seen the woman years ago. He searched the crowded markets, stared at dozens of faces, his pulse quickening whenever someone resembled her even faintly. He interviewed locals, showed the sketch to shopkeepers, even offered rewards. But after days of searching, it all ended the same: silence, confusion, dead ends. His private jet returned to his country with him slumped in his seat, the weight of failure pressing on his chest. The wrong trails became expensive lessons. $5 million spent here, $2 million spent there. Private eyes, community informants, endless advertisements. Every effort drained his fortune, but he didn't care. He had billions, and what was money compared to the peace of finding her? Still, each false lead chipped away at him. At night, lying in his massive bed surrounded by silence, he stared at the ceiling and wondered if fate was laughing at him. Meanwhile, whispers grew louder. The media called him eccentric, saying he was wasting his fortune chasing a ghost. Business partners worried he was losing focus. Friends asked him why he couldn't let go. But he stayed silent, guarding the truth close to his chest. How could they understand? They hadn't seen her eyes the way he had. They hadn't felt her kindness when he was invisible to the world. Inside the mansion, life carried on. The maid, the very woman he sought, continued her quiet duties. She polished the marble floors he walked across, arranged the fresh flowers in his study, and served him tea during his long nights at the desk. He barely noticed her, his mind consumed with the search. When he passed her in the halls, his eyes were always on the sketch, on the reports, never on her face. To him, she was just another shadow in the background of his world. The cruel irony was sharp. Every morning he woke up thinking, where in the world could she be? Yet the answer walked past his door with a tray of breakfast. Every evening he whispered, what if I never find her? While the woman he longed for tidied his library shelves quietly, unnoticed. One night, after a particularly crushing dead end, he stormed into his study and slammed the reports onto the desk. Why can't I find her? He shouted, his voice echoing in the empty room. The maid, standing silently at the doorway with a tray of tea, froze. Her hands trembled slightly, but she steadied herself. She knew who he was searching for. She knew it was her. But she said nothing. She had given him kindness once without expecting anything back, and she did not believe he owed her more. The billionaire, blind to the truth, sat heavily in his chair, burying his face in his hands. His obsession had led him down too many wrong trails, and still he pressed on. She's out there, he whispered to himself. She has to be. What he didn't know was that the wrong trails were not a punishment, they were a delay. Life was waiting for the perfect moment, the moment when truth would strike him harder than all the money he had spent, harder than all the failures combined. And when that moment came, it would break his heart in ways he never expected. Inside the mansion, life moved with the rhythm of quiet footsteps, the soft clatter of dishes, and the rustle of cloth as maids went about their duties. Among them was one woman who worked with unusual calm, as though the noise and chaos of wealth did not touch her at all. She rose early, prepared the halls, polished the banisters, and kept to the corners of the grand house where she would not be noticed. She was the woman the billionaire had been searching for all along. Every day she moved in the background of his life, wiping the same floors he walked across, pouring tea into the same cup he sipped from, and setting flowers in the same room where he buried himself in reports of his ongoing search. She had been by his side for years, invisible in plain sight. And he, blinded by obsession, never saw her. The irony was bitter. He had spent $35 million chasing strangers across countries, hiring investigators, funding media campaigns, all while ignoring the maid who walked by him daily. He remembered the woman who once helped him only as a face from his past, a face he thought could only be found in the farthest corners of the world. But that same face, older now, quieter, full of wisdom, was right there, carrying out tasks with quiet dignity in his home. She remembered him instantly when she first joined the mansion staff. How could she not? The man who once sat hopeless in the cold, whom she had offered warmth and kindness, was now the billionaire whose name appeared in newspapers. She had recognized him the very first time she polished the silverware in his dining room. But she had chosen silence. To her, kindness was never meant to be repaid. She had given him food, words of comfort, and hope years ago, not to earn gratitude, but because it was the right thing to do. Revealing herself now would seem like a claim on his success, and that was not who she was. She had no need for recognition, no desire to be repaid. Still, some nights, when she passed his study and saw him bent over piles of papers, exhausted from chasing false leads, her heart ached. She knew he was searching for her. She could hear the frustration in his voice when he shouted at his investigators. She had seen the sketch of her younger face lying on his desk more than once. And yet she said nothing. Her silence was not cowardice, it was humility. She believed he would never see her in her maid's uniform, never think that the woman he had elevated in memory could possibly be someone he overlooked daily. In his world of wealth and power, she was just another worker in the background. The mansion staff whispered among themselves. They had noticed how often the billionaire spoke about finding her. They had seen the resemblance in the sketch, the way the maid's eyes mirrored the eyes in the drawing. Some urged her quietly to tell him the truth. "Why don't you say something?" one younger maid asked. "He is tearing himself apart to find you." But she only shook her head gently. "If it is meant to be, he will see me. If not, then let him search. My kindness was never meant to buy me riches." Her words spread quietly among the servants, creating an unspoken tension in the household. Everyone knew the truth except the one man who most needed to. And every day he walked past her with files under his arm, frustration in his voice, and blind eyes that never truly looked. The hidden truth weighed heavily in the air. She carried her duties with dignity, but inside, she wondered when fate would finally pull away the curtain. Would he ever recognize her? Or would he spend the rest of his life searching the world, never realizing the answer was always at home? The irony grew sharper with every passing day. He ignored her not out of cruelty but out of blindness, a blindness built by wealth and pride. To him she was just a maid. To her he was once a man in need. And between them, the truth sat like a secret too heavy to remain hidden forever. It was only a matter of time before the quiet walls of the mansion would bear witness to the moment when the billionaire's obsession collided with the reality he had overlooked. And when that truth was revealed, it would not only shock him, it would break his heart. Every morning, the billionaire descended the wide marble staircase with his phone pressed to his ear, his voice sharp, filled with urgency. His mind was always on the search, on meetings with investigators, on the reports stacked high in his study. He barely noticed the staff lined neatly along the hallways, bowing their heads as he passed. To him they were part of the mansion like furniture that moved. Among those figures stood the maid, the very woman he sought. She would be holding a duster or a tray of tea, her head bowed, her posture humble. He walked past her countless times, sometimes close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, but his eyes slid over her as though she were invisible. His ignorance was not deliberate cruelty, it was habit. Years of wealth had taught him to look past those who served him. He greeted business partners with warm handshakes, laughed loudly at parties with celebrities, but he never once truly looked at the faces of the workers in his home. And so, the woman he spent $35 million trying to find was hidden in plain sight, unseen because he had never trained his eyes to look at the simple, the ordinary. She watched him silently as the days turned into weeks. She saw the lines of frustration deepen on his forehead, heard him curse at failed leads, watched him slam doors in disappointment. Sometimes when she brought him tea, she caught a glimpse of the sketch lying on his desk. The sketch of her younger self. She would pause for a second, her heart heavy, then place the tray down and leave before he looked up. The irony gnawed at her quietly. He was exhausting himself, burning money, chasing shadows across the world. Yet every evening when he returned home she was there, polishing the same silverware he dined with, sweeping the same halls he walked through. The other staff noticed the tension. Whispers flowed in the servants' quarters. "He's searching for her," they murmured. "Doesn't he see it? It's her. It's always been her." A young maid once asked, "Why don't you tell him? End his suffering?" But the woman shook her head gently. "He sees only what he wants to see. If fate wishes he will recognize me. Until then I will remain as I am." Her words carried humility, but also sadness. She knew he remembered her as a symbol of hope, someone greater than the uniform she now wore. Perhaps that was why she never revealed herself. She feared his disappointment if he discovered that the woman who had changed his life was just a maid he overlooked daily. The billionaire's ignorance deepened his obsession. He pushed his team harder, demanding results, spending more, traveling farther. He told himself, "When I find her, I will honor her. I will give her anything she desires. I will show her how her kindness changed me." Yet each night, when he returned to the mansion, he passed her in the hall without a second glance. She bore it with quiet strength. Each day she prepared his meals, arranged the flowers, dusted the study. When she overheard him growling into the phone, "She must be somewhere, I will not stop until I find her," she felt a pang of both sorrow and irony. He did not know the truth was standing just outside the door, listening. Sometimes, late at night, she stood alone in the darkened halls, looking up at the grand staircase where he often stormed down with frustration. She whispered to herself, "He doesn't see me now, just as the world didn't see him then." Her words echoed softly in the silence, a reminder of the strange symmetry between them. He had once been invisible to the world and she had seen him. Now she was invisible to him, though he was desperate to find her. The days piled into weeks, the weeks into months, and still the same ritual continued. He passed her by, blind to the truth, while she carried the secret close to her heart. But fate does not allow truth to stay hidden forever. The more he ignored her, the heavier the irony became, until the weight of it was unbearable. It was only a matter of time before something small, a gesture, a word, a memory, would pierce his blindness. And when it happened, the billionaire's world would shatter in ways he could never prepare for. The moment of revelation came not with grand fanfare, but with something small, something ordinary, just as life often delivers its greatest truths. It was a late evening. The billionaire had returned home after another wasted trip, his face tired, his mood dark. He had flown across the country chasing a rumor that turned into nothing more than another stranger's face. His patience was thin, his frustration boiling. He stormed into his study, loosening his tie and throwing his briefcase onto the desk with a loud thud. The sketch of her lay there, worn at the edges, a constant reminder of the woman he had yet to find. He stared at it for a long time as if willing it to give him answers. The maid entered quietly, carrying a tray with tea and biscuits. Her footsteps were soft, her presence almost ghost-like. She set the tray down on the edge of the desk, careful not to disturb the clutter of reports and maps. For a moment, her eyes rested on the sketch and she froze. She hadn't meant to, but the likeness was too familiar, her younger face staring back at her. The billionaire noticed her pause. His head snapped up, irritation sharp in his voice. "What is it? Why are you staring?" She hesitated, her lips parting but no words coming out. Then, with a calm she didn't feel, she whispered, "I remember that night." The words were soft, almost lost in the room, but they struck him like thunder. He blinked, confusion furrowing his brow. "What did you say?" Her hands trembled as she placed the teapot down, but her voice grew steadier. "I remember the night you were cold and hungry. You sat on a bench near the old market. No one would look at you, no one would speak to you, except me." The billionaire's blood ran cold. His breath caught in his throat. He stared at her, truly looking at her for the first time. Her uniform, her tired hands, the lines of age on her face, details he had never noticed before. But behind them were the same eyes from his memory, the same voice that had once given him hope when he had none. "It's you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "All this time, it was you." Silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of the grand clock on the wall. His hands shook as he reached for the sketch, holding it up beside her face. The resemblance was undeniable. Older, yes, but the same. The same woman he had spent $35 million trying to find had been serving him tea, walking his halls, sweeping his floors every single day. His chest tightened, shame crashing over him like a wave. He thought of every moment he had brushed past her without a glance, every time he had spoken without listening, every day he had treated her as invisible. And all this time she had been the one person he had sworn never to forget. The billionaire's legs felt weak. He sank into his chair, his voice breaking. "I searched the world for you. I spent everything He stopped, his throat tight. "And I ignored you every single day." The maid looked at him with quiet dignity. "I never needed you to search for me," she said softly. "That night, I helped you because you were human, not because I wanted anything in return." Tears stung his eyes. He had thought the revelation would bring him peace, but instead, it shattered him. He had wasted years, wasted millions, blinded by pride and obsession. The woman who had changed his life had been there all along, humble, silent, unseen. The weight of his ignorance crushed him. He buried his face in his hands, his voice muffled. "How could I not see you? How blind could I have been?" But she did not scold him. She did not gloat. She simply stood, her hands folded in front of her, her presence steady as it had always been. "Sometimes," she said gently, "we do not see what is right in front of us until life forces us to look. Perhaps now you are ready to see." Her words pierced him deeper than any accusation could. For the first time, the billionaire felt smaller than his wealth, smaller than his pride. He looked up at her through tears, his heart breaking with both guilt and gratitude. This was the moment he had been chasing, but it was nothing like he imagined. It was not triumphant. It was humbling. It was devastating. And yet, in that devastation lay the truth he needed most. The revelation had finally come, not through money, not through power, not through endless searching, but through the quiet dignity of a woman he had ignored all along. The study was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock and the uneven rhythm of the billionaire's breathing. His chest rose and fell heavily as though the air itself weighed him down. Across from him, the maid stood with quiet composure, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her face calm but unreadable. The truth had finally surfaced, and now the walls that pride had built around his heart came crashing down. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes red, his voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me?" His words cracked under the weight of desperation. "Do you know what I've done? Do you know how far I've gone? I spent years, millions, chasing shadows, searching every corner of the world for you. And you were right here." Her gaze was steady, her voice soft but unshakable. "You never asked me who I was," she said simply. "You looked at me but you never saw me." The billionaire flinched as though the words were a blade. He thought of all the mornings he had rushed past her without a glance, all the evenings she had brought him tea while he barked orders at investigators, all the times he had walked by her presence as if she were invisible. She was right. He had never truly seen her. He rose from his chair suddenly, his movements clumsy, his composure broken. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair, his voice rising. I told myself I owed you everything. I told myself I would repay you for the kindness you gave me when I was nothing. And yet, when you were right here, I ignored you. I treated you like, his voice cracked again. He couldn't finish the sentence. The maid's eyes softened, but her tone remained steady. Like I was no one, she said. The words hung in the air like a weight too heavy to carry. His heart twisted. He dropped to the chair again, burying his face in his hands. Forgive me, he whispered, his voice breaking. Please, forgive me. But she did not move closer. She did not place a hand on his shoulder or rush to comfort him. She stood still, her silence demanding honesty. After a long pause, she finally spoke. I did not help you that night because I wanted riches or recognition. I helped you because you were human and you needed kindness. That was all. Nothing more. Her words cut through him, sharp and clear. He had turned her into an obsession, a symbol, an ideal. He had wasted fortunes chasing the memory of her, when all she had ever given him was something priceless that cost nothing, compassion. His voice trembled as he looked up at her. And yet, I forgot what mattered most. I forgot to see you. For the first time, her expression softened into something like sorrow. It is easy to see power, wealth, beauty, she said. It is harder to see the people who serve you, who move quietly in the background of your life. You are not the first to overlook me, and you will not be the last. But I hope that the man I once helped would remember what it meant to be seen. The billionaire's eyes filled again. He pushed himself from the chair and sank to his knees in front of her, his voice raw. I remember now. I swear I will never forget again. You gave me dignity when I had none. And I repaid you with blindness. Please, let me make it right. The sight was shocking. One of the richest, most powerful men in the world kneeling before a maid. But to him it felt necessary. It was not about wealth, not about power, not about obligation. It was about finally seeing her as she was, the woman whose quiet kindness had saved him long ago. The maid looked down at him, her eyes glistening though she held back her tears. After a long silence, she spoke. I do not need your riches. I do not need repayment. What I need, what the world needs, is for you to live differently. To see differently. If you want to honor me, honor others the way you failed to honor me. That will be enough. Her words sank deep into his heart, carving a wound that would never heal and a lesson that would never fade. He bowed his head lower, his voice hoarse. I will. I swear it. From this day I will see. The confrontation ended not with anger, not with punishment, but with truth. Truth that humbled him more than all his failures, truth that would follow him for the rest of his life. And in that moment, the billionaire realized something he had never understood before. Money could buy him everything, but it could not buy back the years he had wasted ignoring the one person who mattered most. The night of the revelation stretched long into silence, but by morning, something had shifted inside the billionaire. For years, he had woken with his first thought consumed by the search. Who she was, where she could be, what more he could spend to find her. But now he knew. The face he had dreamed of, the woman he had longed to thank, had been right there. And with the truth came not relief, but a deep ache, a guilt that clung to him like a shadow. He didn't eat breakfast that day. He didn't bark orders at his assistants or call his investigators for updates. Instead, he sat quietly at the head of the long dining table, staring at the polished surface, his reflection looking back at him like a stranger. The staff moved around him carefully, their footsteps cautious. They had all heard the truth. By now, the entire mansion buzzed with the knowledge that the billionaire's maid was the very woman he had spent $35 million searching for. Yet no one dared speak of it aloud. When she entered the room carrying a simple tray, he stood immediately. His instinct was to rush toward her, to say something, to promise her the world. But she met his gaze with that same calm dignity, and he understood. Grand gestures were not what she wanted. What she had given him long ago had been simple. Food, kindness, dignity. And what she asked for now was not money, not gifts, but change. So he began slowly. That day, instead of disappearing into his study, he walked through the mansion with open eyes. For the first time, he noticed the staff not as shadows but as people. He learned their names. He asked about their families. He thanked them for tasks he had never acknowledged before. The gardener, surprised, nearly dropped his tools when the billionaire praised the roses. The cook blinked in shock when he complimented her meal. For years, these people had been invisible to him, but now he saw them clearly. The transformation spread beyond the mansion. In meetings with his executives, his tone softened. Where once he had demanded and belittled, he now listened. He began funding projects not for publicity but for purpose. Schools in poor neighborhoods, shelters for the homeless, scholarships for underprivileged youth. Reporters called it a sudden shift, a rebranding, but those closest to him knew it was something deeper. It was not about image, it was about redemption. Still, the guilt lingered. At night, he replayed the years he had wasted, the millions he had burned chasing her across the world, while she polished his floors and served his meals unnoticed. He often found himself sitting at the staircase late in the evening, the same staircase he had rushed down so many mornings blind to her presence. He whispered to himself, "How blind I was. How blind." One evening, he approached her in the quiet of the kitchen, where she was folding linens. He hesitated, then spoke softly. "I want to do more than just change myself. I want to honor you. Tell me, what would make you happy?" She looked up, her expression gentle. "Happiness is not bought with money. It is found in knowing you are seen, respected, valued. Do not honor me with riches. Honor me by ensuring no one else in this house or in your world feels invisible the way you made me feel." Her words sank into him like scripture. He nodded, tears threatening again, but this time not from shame alone, this time from clarity. Over time, his transformation became undeniable. The man once mocked as arrogant and cold became known for humility. He used his fortune not as a weapon of power but as a tool for compassion. He spoke openly at events about dignity, respect, and the danger of arrogance. When asked what had caused his change, he never revealed her name, but he always said, "I was blind for too long. Someone once gave me kindness when I deserved none and I failed to see them. That failure will guide me for the rest of my life." The world praised his change, but he didn't care for applause. What mattered was that he finally understood. What mattered was that he finally saw. And though he could never erase the years of ignorance, he could spend the rest of his life living the lessons she had taught him. Not with words, but with silence, patience, and dignity. The billionaire had spent $35 million to locate her, but in the end what she gave him was priceless. The ability to see the humanity in others. That was the real treasure he had been searching for all along. Years passed, and the story of the billionaire's transformation became something whispered in boardrooms, written about in quiet columns, and spoken of by those who once worked for him. The world had always known him as a man of ruthless ambition, a tycoon who bent industries to his will. But now they began to see him differently, not as a man who flaunted power, but as one who wielded compassion with the same intensity he once wielded wealth. The change was not overnight, but steady like the shifting of seasons. His company policies began to reflect his new outlook. Where once workers had been invisible cogs, now they were treated with respect. Wages increased, healthcare improved, and education funds were created for employees' children. Executives were baffled at first. Why would a billionaire, a man who had conquered his world, suddenly care so deeply for those at the bottom? But those who had seen him in his mansion, kneeling before the maid he once ignored, understood. His transformation rippled outward. He funded legal clinics for the poor, believing everyone deserved proper representation. He built community centers in neighborhoods he once drove past without a second thought. He visited schools not for speeches that glorified his success, but to tell children stories of humility. He would stand in front of classrooms filled with bright eyes and say, "Money will give you many things, but if you cannot see the people beside you, then you are truly poor." The media eventually uncovered his $35 million search, branding it the most expensive lesson in humanity. Some mocked him for the waste. Others admired him for what he learned. But he didn't care for headlines. What mattered to him was that her lesson lived on. The maid, his quiet mentor, continued her work in the mansion, though things had changed between them. She was no longer invisible. He greeted her each morning with warmth, asked about her day, and insisted she sit at the table when the staff ate. When she grew older and her health began to fail, he arranged for her comfort, ensuring she never wanted for anything. Yet she never demanded luxury. She lived as she always had, modest, humble, steady. And still, she reminded him, respect is not what you do for me because you feel guilty. Respect is what you do for everyone because it is right. When she passed away peacefully one spring morning, the billionaire felt the loss more deeply than he had ever felt before. He stood at her graveside, not in a designer suit but in plain black, tears streaking his face as he whispered, "I see you now. I will always see you." Her passing did not end her influence, it expanded it. In her honor, he established a foundation dedicated to uplifting domestic workers, cleaners, and caretakers, the people who lived in the background of society. He poured his fortune into giving them healthcare, education, and dignity. The foundation bore her name, not his, because he wanted the world to remember her, not him. Years later, as his hair turned gray and his steps slowed, the billionaire often returned to the places where his journey began. He would walk through shelters and community kitchens, speaking to the people there not as a benefactor above them, but as one of them. "I know what it is to be unseen," he would tell them. "And I know the power of one person who looks at you and says, 'I see you.' That one moment can change a life. It changed mine." When he eventually passed, the world remembered him not as the man who built empires, but as the man who learned to see. In speeches, people quoted his line, "If you cannot see the people beside you, then you are truly poor." In the halls of his foundation, portraits of ordinary workers hung proudly, their names etched in gold, their stories honored. And so, the legacy of the billionaire was not his billions. It was the lesson of a maid he had once ignored. She had been invisible to him once, but in the end, her influence made him unforgettable. The years after the billionaire's death carried his name across newspapers, but it wasn't his skyscrapers or his billion-dollar deals that people remembered. What echoed through communities, schools, and families was the story of his transformation. The moment when a maid, once invisible in the background of his life, became the compass that guided his final years. The foundation he had built in her honor grew larger than even he could have imagined. What started as a small program for domestic workers expanded into a global movement. Cities built shelters with her name carved into the entrance. Villages far away received schools that carried her portrait in the classrooms. Caregivers, janitors, cleaners, and nannies, the people who were too often overlooked, found dignity and recognition under her legacy. In boardrooms, executives quoted the billionaire's line, "If you cannot see the people beside you, then you are truly poor." In schools, teachers retold the tale of how a woman's simple act of kindness humbled a man who once believed money could buy the world. Children grew up learning not to measure worth by wealth, but by compassion. And within the mansion, now converted into a museum and training center for social justice, visitors walked through the very halls where he had once ignored her. The marble staircase, the study, the grand dining hall, all were preserved. A single maid's uniform was displayed in a glass case, a quiet symbol of the woman who had lived in the shadows but became the light that changed everything. Generations later, young lawyers, doctors, and leaders stood before her story and felt the weight of its lesson. Some cried, some stood in awe, all carried the same thought: never overlook the person who stands silently beside you. Her name became a symbol not of servitude but of strength. The strength to give kindness without expecting reward, and the strength to live humbly even when fate made her unforgettable. The world, in its rush for progress, had always glorified power and money. But this story shifted something. It reminded people that humanity is built not on fortunes or fame, but on the unseen acts of dignity that ripple across time. In quiet corners, workers still whispered her name like a blessing. "She was one of us," they said. "And because of her, the world finally sees us." And so, long after both the maid and the billionaire had left this earth, their story lived on, not as a tale of wealth, but as an eternal lesson. A lesson that could not die because it was written in the lives of those who now lived with dignity, respect, and hope. In the end, the maid who had once been ignored every day became the voice of generations, proving that a single act of kindness, offered when no one is watching, can echo forever.